Right, so today we are in Liverpool Cathedral, a building which was begun about a little over 100 years ago at the turn of the last century and completed in 1978.
Thereabouts.
Thereabouts, 1978. I need to check my notes. There we go. 74 years in build, and I believe some have taken longer, but that's obviously an extraordinary length of time and an incredible accomplishment, as you will see behind us. The great space which we're now standing in is capable of holding 2,000 people, and for a brief chat today, two of them, myself and Stuart Haynes, the Director of Communications at Liverpool Cathedral and Vicar of Ormskirk Church, has been very kind enough to share some of his time and talk about some of the challenges in leading change in a traditional establishment, in a traditional organisation. And obviously a cathedral and the church are one of those such organisations.
and then some, yeah.
I'd be really keen to hear about what changes you've seen in your career, and in particular around the communications in an organisation. How has it changed over the course of your career and the last couple of years?
I suppose from a comms point of view, the biggest change is obviously the digital revolution and the whole sort of switch from print and from paper. I sort of remember the first emails I was sending a good few years ago back in the office, and this is very exciting, and you don't take a piece of paper around the office anymore. And that has changed both the way we think about communications, the speed at which we do communications, and that whole process. But when you relate it to a church that is still sort of founded on a scripture from 2,000 odd years ago that doesn't really sort of do change, both in a sort of actual way in terms of sort of the mechanics of stuff, but also the sort of mental way in terms of the way it thinks. We like to think very slowly and carefully about any change.
Arguably, that's a good thing.
It can be a good thing, but it's sort of it's where the conflict comes. I think that's the problem. So one of the big conflicts I have in my job is around people like myself saying, well, we need to be, speedy, we need to be digital, we need to be social, we need to be engaging in that kind of way. And a lot of people saying, yeah, but our constituent market don't get it. They still want paper, they still want print, they still want to be engaged with in what probably for a lot of people is even before the traditions that they're aware of.
And that conflict, I suppose that's interesting in and of itself, but that gives you some difficulties in communicating with that community. So the community are perhaps more diverse.
It also gives, I think, a real challenge to an organisation like this is where do we put our effort in communication. So one potential pitfall is this thing around saying, do we think, okay, we have to do 2 lots of communication, we'll do all the snazzy digital, reaching out to new generations kind of stuff, and then we'll translate all of that onto bits of paper and magazines and print? Or do we kind of say, well, how can we invest in improving the access that people who don't want to engage in the new way, should we say? How do we actually give them the skills and tools and confidence to do that?
So as not to exclude people who are not specifically digital.
Yeah.
So that sounds like a fine balance.
Well, the balance is actually what route do you choose to not exclude those people? So do you choose a route of giving them stuff in the way that they're used to, and you're not excluding them that way? Or do you choose to give them the skills to cope with the digital world? Because as a church, we might be still sort of providing the old style of communication, but the whole world around them is all in the new style. So by keeping them in that place, are we actually excluding them from Brave New World, if we want to call it that?
So a difficult position then to not exclude anybody, because that would be wrong, and perhaps part of the solution is to help them forward with new skills. And if anything, it's a positive thing that the community, the church as part of the community, can actually do that, to include people, but not exclude them if they can't make that step for whatever reason. I mean,
we talk in church terms about being a family, and so it's, how do you have every generation of family talking to one another, and the rest of the world is very much sort of, a large part of it is looking at different generations in their own blocks. We're still cross-generational, and that's a challenge.
That's happening in microcosm now as well, isn't it? So every family or many families have that cross-generational challenge.
Yeah.
And one of the things, instead of the entire family sat in front of Cagney and Lacey as it used to be a few years ago.
I remember those days.
Or whatever it might be, that there are now a proliferation of screens and connections, and everybody's watching their own media stream in their own space, and not necessarily talking to each other. But that's happening at a much bigger scale across all of the communities that might interface with the church.
Yeah, and when you've got an organisation like ours who wants to spread a message out to the wide population and reach a younger generation. I mean, you said vicar of Aldersgate. Well, one of the things about being a vicar is you're called to proclaim the gospel afresh to each generation.
Okay.
Well, that's very old language, but you can interpret that and say, well, how do I reach the young kids, as it were, or different people with the sort of truths that I know? And it sort of becomes very challenging in terms of, well, that there is no one group. I asked my son ages ago, well, okay, how do I engage with your generation? What apps are you on? What social media are you on? And he just, well, it depends what you're interested in. And when we're trying to get a message to everybody, that's quite difficult.
And there's been a sort of a scattering of those different platforms. There used to be a very few, and it was easy to reach a lot of people with them. And now that's dispersed. It's quite difficult. What about organisationally? So there's a phrase I'm fond of. We've talked many times about this. You've heard this once or twice, but the culture eats strategy for breakfast.
Yeah.
So what about sort of organisationally in the wider organisation? Is there a pressure to lead digital technology in? Do you think that you see opportunities, but it's difficult to?
I think what you find in church kind of communications is that you've got culture, and then you've got this horrible thing called, it's a wonderful thing obviously, but a horrible thing called theology, and that can really stymie a push forward. And so the culture of the church is to sort of look after the traditions and to maintain the traditions. I mean, even this cathedral, which is quite a modern building, as you said, has a traditional feel in the way that it's built, the Gothic arches and all of that. So tradition is really important. And so those in the church who are experimenting with new forms of communication, not radically, not cutting edge, but new forms for traditional organisation, are seen as, well, they're just playing with the toys of the age and we'll do the real stuff elsewhere. And getting that message across to a lot of people is very, very difficult.
Whatever we might think about them, there's some interesting examples of communicators in the digital space right now, and one that springs to mind is the recently elected president of the US, who's made great guns in terms of getting audience, which he has direct access to.
Yeah.
Is that a sort of a state of things to come? Is that?
I think that's a real lesson for us all, actually, because I think as a sort of hoary old digital director of communication, one of the sort of received things is you got, what are your channels? So you think, well, you've got to go for the print media, you've got to go for the broadcast, the radio and stuff like that. And all of them, you've got to persuade them to take your message on. And someone like Trump has gone actually right past that. And he can put out only 2 tweets in a day, and the media will rush and follow that up and pull that to him. And there's something really, I mean, regardless of what you think of his politics or anything else, it's something really clever in the way that he's taken social media on.
We've talked about owned media for many years now, and the example there is of somebody who has absolutely and truly owned that media. Now, maybe it was acquired through the TV show or various other things, but once acquired, the ability to do things at a great scale with it and lead without asking permission from press or other media is a very interesting example. So we'll watch with interest how that goes.
And I mean, I suppose what he's got to that point is that's now given you the confidence that no other press secretary or organisation will actually attack the media and say you're rubbish and you're wrong and he's got the confidence, whereas everybody else is sort of like, we'll do a bit of that but not publicly.
Astonishing without precedent, in my view. But very interesting. Well, in terms of your journey, what's been your biggest sort of learning point? And I think, what do you wish you'd known at the beginning?
That's a really difficult question. I think I think it's really about sort of, in one sense, funny enough, in setting this up, you kind of said, "Oh, jokingly, well, content is king," and I think it is going back to that's the traditional thing. It is that the content is important. How we make that engaging. I spent a long time getting obsessed with the sort of mechanics. So when Facebook first started, I spent loads of time getting obsessed with how many likes my page has got and all of those kind of things, which I think everybody did. But actually, that
You must have done
wasn't
something right.
achieving.
I had a look at your numbers yesterday, and they're extraordinary. Liverpool Cathedral's put on a few.
Yeah, we punch above our weight. You know, we're very proud of the TripAdvisor stats. A
Rightly
city of tourism to be number one there, and I think the cathedral does punch above its weight in so many fashions. But I think it's actually, you achieve more by being less obsessed by the numbers of likes and more obsessed by the level of engagement and the level of interest and that whole sense of sort of connecting with people. And in a sense, that's what, if I go right back to the church angle of it, that's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to engage and connect with people. You know, Jesus had followers. He probably had likes and things like that. But that's how it kind of worked for him.
It sounds like that could be paraphrased. Execute well, the numbers will follow.
Yeah. I mean, so many of the best things in art and culture are done by people who are passionate about what they do, and the content, and those kind of things. And then people just go, "Yeah, I like that. That's really good." You know, and it's the old marketing truth, isn't it? You really want to get word of mouth, and you only truly get that if what you're delivering is good and what people want.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Well, Stuart, that's been great. I've really appreciated hearing some of your insights about communications. So thank you very much for your time.
Not a problem.
Thanks.